At the reading of my grandfather's will, my brother got the house. $1.8 million in assessed value. My sister got the investment accounts. My mother got the jewelry collection, the antique furniture, and the life insurance payout. The lawyer turned to me last. He adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and said, "And to you, Nathan, your grandfather leaves his personal toolbox and its contents." My father leaned over to my mother and whispered loud enough for the entire room to hear, "Well, he always knew Nathan was good with his hands." My brother laughed. My sister looked away. I did not flinch. I picked up the rusted metal box from the floor beside the lawyer's desk, tucked it under my arm, and walked out without saying a word. 3 weeks later, I dropped that toolbox in my garage and heard something shift inside that should not have been there. And everything I thought I knew about my family, about my grandfather, about my entire life, cracked open like that false bottom. I should have seen it coming. 36 years of signs, and I missed every single one. My name is Nathan Caldwell, and at 36 years old, I was a patent attorney at one of the most respected intellectual property firms in Chicago. I had built a career protecting other people's inventions, other people's ideas, other people's legacies. The irony of that would not hit me until much later. From my office on the 28th floor, I could see the lake stretching out toward the horizon, gray and endless in the winter months. I had a corner office, a six-figure salary, and a reputation in the field that partners twice my age respected. I had everything my parents said they wanted for me. I just never had them. The Caldwell family operated on a simple, unspoken hierarchy. My older brother, Drew, was the golden child. He had played quarterback in high school, married his college sweetheart, and gone into real estate development. He drove a Range Rover, lived in a 5-bedroom colonial in Lake Forest, and had 2 kids who called my parents every Sunday on FaceTime. My sister, Morgan, was the baby, the creative one, the one who could do no wrong because she had been born 6 weeks premature and my parents never stopped treating her like she might break. She ran a small interior design firm that my father had quietly funded to the tune of $140,000 over the years. And then there was me, Nathan, the middle child, the quiet one, the one who paid his own way through law school, who never asked for a dime, and who still somehow ended up being the one they called when the furnace broke, when the car needed a cosigner, when the medical bills from my father's knee surgery arrived and nobody else wanted to deal with the insurance company. I handled all of it, every single time. The pattern started early. I must have been 7 or 8 years old when I first noticed it. Christmas morning, 1997. Drew got a brand new bicycle with a red bow on the handlebars. Morgan got a dollhouse that was taller than she was, with real working lights in every room. I got a pack of colored pencils and a notebook. My mother saw my face and said, "Nathan, you love drawing. We thought you would prefer something practical." I did love drawing, but I also loved bicycles. I remember sitting on the stairs that afternoon, watching Drew ride his bike up and down the driveway through the front window, and thinking that maybe I had done something wrong. Maybe if I was better, quieter, more helpful, they would see me the way they saw him. That became my operating system for the next 3 decades. When I was 10, my father took Drew to a Chicago Bears game for his birthday. I asked if I could come. My father said, "It is a father-son thing, Nathan." I said, "I am your son too." He looked at me like I had said something confusing, patted my shoulder, and said, "Next time, buddy." Next time never came. The following year, he took Drew again. And the year after that, I stopped asking. There were smaller moments too. Hundreds of them, stacked on top of each other like bricks in a wall I did not realize was being built around me. The way my mother would introduce us to her friends. "This is Drew, our athlete, and Morgan, our little artist." Then she would pause, like she was trying to remember a 3rd item on a grocery list, and say, "And this is Nathan." No adjective, no descriptor, just Nathan. As if my existence was sufficient information and no further detail was required. In 5th grade, I won the school science fair with a project on electromagnetic fields. My parents did not come to the awards ceremony. Drew had a basketball game that same evening, a regular season game that meant nothing, but they went to that instead. My grandfather was the one who showed up. He sat in the back row of the gymnasium in his old wool coat, clapping louder than anyone when they called my name. Afterward, he took me to a diner and bought me a chocolate milkshake and told me something I never forgot. He said, "Nathan, some people cannot see what is right in front of them. That does not mean it is not there. You keep building. You keep making things. One day, the right person will see what you have made, and it will change everything." I was 11 years old. I did not fully understand what he meant, but I remembered every word. Grandpa Harold was different from the rest of them. He had worked as a machinist for 43 years at a manufacturing plant on the south side of Chicago. He came home every day with grease under his fingernails and metal shavings in his cuffs. My father always spoke about him with a kind of embarrassed distance, like Grandpa Harold was a phase the family had outgrown. "Dad's a simple man," my father would say. "He is comfortable with what he knows." But Grandpa Harold was not simple. He read constantly. History, science, engineering manuals. His basement workshop was filled with sketches and prototypes and notebooks dense with calculations I could not understand as a child. He was always tinkering, always improving things. He fixed everything in the neighborhood. Lawnmowers, radios, the plumbing at the church. People brought him broken things, and he made them work again. When I was 14, I started spending weekends in his workshop. While Drew was at football practice and Morgan was at dance class, I was in Grandpa Harold's basement learning how to use a lathe, how to read a schematic, how to think about problems in 3 dimensions. He taught me patience. He taught me precision. He showed me how to measure twice and cut once, how to feel the resistance in metal when you are pushing it too hard, how to listen to a machine and know from its sound whether something was aligned or off by 1/1000th of an inch. Those weekends were the only time during my childhood that I felt completely seen. In that basement, with the smell of machine oil and sawdust, with the hum of the old fluorescent lights overhead, I was not the forgotten middle child. I was Harold's apprentice, his student, his partner. He told me stories during those sessions. Stories about the plant where he worked, about the machines he helped design, about the ideas he had that nobody ever listened to. He would hold up a bearing or a gasket and explain how it was designed, then show me his notebook where he had sketched a better version. "See this?" he would say, pointing to his drawing with a pencil-stained finger. "This would last 3 times as long and cost half as much to produce." I showed it to my supervisor in '74. He said, "Harold, stick to what you know." 2 years later, a company in Michigan patented something almost identical. Almost. He would shake his head and close the notebook and get back to work. There was a sadness in those stories that I did not recognize until years later. A resignation, like a man who had built something extraordinary and then watched someone else put their name on it. By the time I graduated from law school, I had spent over $60,000 of my own money on tuition, working 2 jobs throughout. My parents contributed nothing. When I graduated summa cum laude, they came to the ceremony but left early because Drew's wife was having a dinner party. My grandfather stayed. He was 81 years old, and he sat through the entire 3-hour ceremony in a suit I had never seen him wear before. Afterward, he shook my hand and said, "Patent law. You are going to protect the people who make things. That is important work, Nathan. More important than you know." Over the years, I became the family's invisible support structure. When my father needed knee surgery and the insurance denied the claim, I spent 40 hours fighting the appeals process until they reversed the decision. When Drew's real estate business hit a rough patch in 2018, I loaned him $35,000. He never paid it back, and when I mentioned it once at a family dinner, my mother said, "Nathan, family does not keep score. You should be grateful you were in a position to help." When Morgan's design firm needed a lease negotiated, I did it pro bono. When my parents' roof leaked during a storm, I paid the $12,000 repair bill because Drew said he was cash-strapped, and Morgan said she was between projects. I estimate I gave my family close to $280,000 over 15 years. I never once received a thank you card. Not once. No phone call. No text. No acknowledgement of any kind. The money was expected, absorbed, and forgotten, like rain falling into a lake. When I tried to set boundaries, when I said I could not afford to cover a particular expense, the response was always the same formula. My mother would sigh and say, "I just think it is important for families to support each other." My father would go quiet and cold. Drew would call me selfish. Morgan would cry. And within a week, I would find myself writing another check, hating myself for it but unable to stop, because the alternative was silence. And silence from my family felt like disappearing entirely. I remember one Thanksgiving in particular. 2021. I had just closed a major case at work, a patent infringement suit that resulted in a $12 million settlement for my client. I was exhausted but proud. I drove to my parents' house expecting, for once, to share some good news. When I got there, the entire conversation was about Drew's latest real estate deal, a strip mall development in Schaumburg that he described in such grandiose terms you would have thought he was building the Sistine Chapel. I waited for a pause. When it came, I said, "I had a good week too. We won the Patterson case. 12 million. My father glanced at me and said, "That is nice, Nathan." Then he turned back to Drew and said, "So what is the timeline on the Schaumburg project?" That was it. That was the full extent of my family's interest in the biggest professional achievement of my career. For words. "That is nice, Nathan." The exclusion was not always dramatic. Sometimes it was quiet, almost casual, like they had simply forgotten I existed. I would find out about family vacations through Instagram posts. Drew would upload photos from the beach house in Michigan, the whole family gathered on the deck, and I would be sitting in my apartment in Chicago wondering why nobody had mentioned it. I confronted my mother about it once. She said, "Oh, honey, we assumed you were too busy with work. You know how you are." I did not know how I was. I just knew I was not there. The worst was Christmas of 2023. I drove 3 hours through a snowstorm to my parents' house. I brought gifts for everyone. Personalized, thoughtful gifts that I had spent weeks choosing. A rare first edition book for my father. A custom necklace for my mother. Toys for Drew's kids that I had researched for hours to make sure they were age-appropriate and educational. When I arrived, the house was warm and bright and full of laughter. Drew and his family were already there. Morgan and her boyfriend were decorating the tree. My mother was in the kitchen making her famous pot roast. And when I walked in, carrying bags of gifts and a bottle of wine, my mother looked up and said, "Oh, Nathan, we did not set a place for you. We were not sure you were coming." There were 9 chairs at the table. None of them was for me. I put the gifts under the tree. I set the wine on the counter. And I sat on a folding chair that Drew's son had been using for a fort, pulled up to the corner of the table, eating off a paper plate while everyone else used the good china. Nobody acknowledged it. Nobody apologized. My father talked about Drew's latest development project. My mother showed Morgan's boyfriend photos of Morgan as a baby. And I sat there, 35 years old, successful, accomplished, and completely invisible. Grandpa Harold called me that night. He always called me on Christmas. He said, "How was dinner?" And I said, "Fine." He was quiet for a long time, and then he said, "Nathan, I am going to fix this. Not today, not tomorrow. But I am going to make sure they see you. I promise." I thought he was just being kind. The way old men are kind when they cannot change anything but want you to feel like someone is trying. He died 4 months later. April 14th, 2024. A heart attack in his workshop. They found him at his bench with a pencil still in his hand and a notebook open to a page of drawings. He was 89 years old. The funeral was exactly what I expected. My father delivered a eulogy that was 3 minutes long and mentioned Grandpa Harold's simple life and dedication to manual work, as if those were quaint curiosities rather than the foundation of everything our family had. Drew checked his phone twice during the service. Morgan cried, but mostly because her boyfriend had just broken up with her the week before and she was emotional about everything. I was the one who sat with Grandpa Harold's old friends from the plant, listening to them tell stories about a man my family had never bothered to know. One of them, a retired engineer named Walter, pulled me aside after the service and said, "Your grandfather was the smartest man I ever met. What they did to him was criminal. Literally criminal." I asked him what he meant, but he shook his head and said, That is not for me to tell. Harold wanted to tell you himself. I think he left you away. I did not understand what Walter meant until the will reading 3 weeks later. The law office was in downtown Chicago. Dark wood, leather chairs, the smell of old paper and expensive coffee. My parents, Drew, Morgan, and I sat around a conference table while Grandpa Harold's attorney, a man named Richard Stavros who looked like he had been practicing law since before I was born, read through the document. The will was straightforward for everyone else. The house in Lakeview to Drew, because Drew had expressed interest in developing the property. The investment accounts to Morgan, because Grandpa Harold wanted to support her creative endeavors. The jewelry and furniture and life insurance to my mother, because she was his only child and he wanted her to be comfortable. My father got nothing, which was notable but not surprising. Grandpa Harold and my father had never been close. And then there was me. To my grandson Nathan Andrew Caldwell, I leave my personal toolbox and all of its contents, with the instruction that he examine it carefully and with the patience I know he possesses. Drew snorted. My father made his handyman comment. My mother looked at me with something that might have been pity but was probably just embarrassment. Morgan stared at her phone. Richard Stavros looked at me over his glasses with an expression I could not read. It was not pity. It was almost anticipation. He said, "Mr. Caldwell, I want you to know that your grandfather was very specific about this bequest. He revised it 3 times in the last year of his life. He wanted to make sure the wording was exactly right." I nodded. I picked up the toolbox. It was heavy, maybe 30 pounds, and the metal was rusted in places, the handle wrapped in old electrical tape. It looked like exactly what it was. A working man's toolbox that had seen 40 years of daily use. I walked out of that office and put it in the trunk of my car. I drove home in silence. No radio, no podcast, nothing. Just the sound of the highway and the weight of that toolbox behind me, shifting slightly on every turn. For 3 weeks, the toolbox sat on my workbench in the garage. I looked at it every time I came home. I opened it once, the day after the will reading. Inside were tools. Wrenches, screwdrivers, pliers, a set of Allen keys, a small ball-peen hammer. Good tools, well-maintained, but nothing extraordinary. I closed it and felt a wave of something I was ashamed to name. Disappointment. My grandfather, the one person who had always seen me, had left me a box of old tools while the rest of the family divided up nearly $3 million in assets. I told myself it did not matter. I told myself the tools had sentimental value. I told myself Grandpa Harold loved me and this was his way of passing on something personal. But late at night, alone in my apartment, I could not stop the thought from surfacing. Even he did not think I was worth more than a rusted toolbox. The discovery happened on a Tuesday night. May 7th, 2024. I had come home late from the office, tired and frustrated after a long deposition. I went to the garage to grab a socket wrench because my kitchen faucet was leaking. I reached for the toolbox on the workbench, but my hand was still damp from washing my face, and the rusted metal slipped from my grip. The toolbox fell 3 feet to the concrete floor and landed on its side with a crash that echoed through the garage. And I heard it, a sound that did not match the tools inside. A hollow thud, followed by a sliding noise, like something heavy shifting inside a hidden compartment. I picked up the toolbox and held it level. I tilted it slowly to the left. Something moved. Something beneath the tools, beneath what I had assumed was the bottom of the box. My hands were shaking as I removed every tool, one by one, setting them on the workbench. The interior of the box was lined with a thin metal sheet, slightly discolored compared to the walls. I pressed on it. It gave slightly. There was a space underneath, a false bottom. I ran my fingers along the edges and found a tiny latch, no bigger than a thumbnail, hidden under a strip of electrical tape in the corner. I peeled back the tape and flipped the latch. The bottom panel lifted out, and underneath it was a space about 2 inches deep that ran the entire length and width of the toolbox. Inside that space were 4 items. A small brass key with a number etched into it. A sealed envelope with my name written on it in Grandpa Harold's unmistakable handwriting. A leather-bound notebook, old and worn, filled with drawings, calculations, and dates. and a folded document that looked like it had been photocopied from something much older. I sat down on the cold concrete floor of my garage and opened the envelope first. The letter was 6 pages long, written in pencil, in Grandpa Harold's careful, deliberate hand. It started with 3 words that made my throat close. Dear Nathan, finally. He wrote about the plant where he had worked for 43 years. Meridian Manufacturing. He had been hired in 1969 as a floor machinist, but within 5 years, he had redesigned 3 of their core production processes, cutting waste by 40% and increasing output by 25%. His supervisors took credit. He filed internal reports. They disappeared. In 1978, he designed something bigger. A precision valve mechanism for industrial hydraulic systems that was unlike anything on the market. It was simpler, more durable, and cheaper to produce than the existing standard. He sketched it in his notebooks. He built a prototype in his basement. And he made the mistake of showing it to his plant manager, a man named Donald Hargrove. Hargrove told Grandpa Harold that the company would handle the patent filing, that it would be credited to the team, that Harold would receive a bonus and a promotion. Grandpa Harold signed a document he did not fully understand. The patent was filed in 1979 under Meridian Manufacturing's name. Harold's name appeared nowhere on it. The valve mechanism went into production in 1981 and became the industry standard for hydraulic systems across North America. Meridian Manufacturing built an empire on it. They were acquired in 1994 for $340 million, and the valve design was cited as their most valuable intellectual property. Grandpa Harold received a $2,000 bonus and a plaque. The letter went on. Harold wrote that he had consulted a lawyer in 1985, a man who told him he had a strong case for patent theft, but that fighting a corporation like Meridian would cost more money than Harold had and take more years than he could afford. Harold had a daughter to raise, a mortgage to pay. He was a machinist, not a millionaire. So he kept his head down, kept working, and kept every single piece of evidence. Every sketch, every draft, every dated notebook entry, every internal memo he could get his hands on. He stored them in the one place nobody would ever look, the false bottom of his toolbox. But the letter revealed something else, something that made the patent theft feel almost secondary. Starting in 1992, Grandpa Harold had begun receiving annual royalty statements from a trust that had been established without his knowledge. It turned out that the lawyer he had consulted in '85, a man named Samuel Rieger, had not simply walked away from the case. Rieger had filed a quiet claim with the Patent Office and had negotiated a sealed settlement with Meridian Manufacturing in 1991. The settlement included a trust fund that would receive ongoing royalties from the valve patent for as long as it remained in commercial use. The trust was in Harold's name, and it had been accumulating for over 30 years. The current value, as of Harold's last statement in January 2024, was $47.3 million. I read that number 3 times. I put the letter down. I picked it up and read it again. $47.3 million. Grandpa Harold explained why he had never touched the money. He wrote that he had planned to reveal the trust to the family when he retired, but something changed his mind. In 2005, he had told my mother about a smaller inheritance he had received from his own father, $32,000. My mother had immediately told my father, who had told Drew, who had hired a financial advisor to help them manage it. Within 18 months, the money was gone. Spent on a down payment for Drew's first real estate investment, a vacation to Florida for my parents, and new furniture for my mother's house. Nobody asked Harold. Nobody thanked him. Nobody even told him where the money had gone until he asked about it directly, and my mother said, "Dad, we used it for the family. That is what family does." That was the moment Harold decided to hide the trust. He watched my family for the next 20 years, hoping to see something that would change his mind. Instead, he saw them exclude me, exploit me, and ignore me while celebrating Drew and Morgan for accomplishments they had not earned. He saw my father dismiss his life's work as manual labor. He saw my mother use his home as a backdrop for her own social aspirations. He saw Drew inherit his sense of entitlement and Morgan inherit his mother's blindness to anyone outside her immediate comfort. And he saw me. He saw me working 2 jobs through law school. He saw me show up every Christmas with gifts for people who did not set a place for me at the table. He saw me pay for roofs and surgeries and loans that would never be repaid. He saw me become a patent attorney, and he understood, perhaps better than I did, the significance of that choice. The letter ended with instructions. The brass key opened a safe deposit box at First National Trust, box number 714. Inside the box were the original patent documents, the settlement agreement, the trust certificates, and a notarized letter from Samuel Rieger confirming everything. Harold instructed me to contact Rieger's firm, which was still active and now run by his son, Daniel Rieger. Daniel had all the legal files and was expecting my call. The last paragraph of the letter said this: Nathan, I spent 43 years watching other people take credit for what I built. I will not let that happen to you. This is yours. Not because the law says so, because you are the only one who ever understood that making something real is more important than taking something easy. They will come for it. They will say it belongs to the family. It does not. It belongs to you because you are the only one who ever belonged to me. Fix what they broke, son. Starting with yourself. All my love, Grandpa Harold. I sat on that garage floor for 2 hours. I read the letter 4 times. I went through the notebook page by page, looking at 40 years of meticulous documentation. Sketches dated and signed. Calculations verified. Memos annotated. Correspondence filed. My grandfather had built a case that any patent attorney would recognize as bulletproof. He had done it quietly, patiently, over decades, waiting for the right moment and the right person. He had waited for me. The next morning, I called Daniel Rieger. He answered on the second ring and said, I have been expecting this call. Your grandfather told me you would figure out the toolbox eventually. He said to give you a month. Took you 3 weeks. He would have been proud. Daniel confirmed everything. The trust was real, fully funded, and legally mine. The original settlement had been sealed, but the terms were clear. The royalties flowed to the trust, and the trust's sole beneficiary was Harold Caldwell. Upon his death, the trust transferred to his designated heir. Me. Not my mother. Not Drew. Not Morgan. Me. I asked Daniel why my mother was not the beneficiary. He paused and then said, Your grandfather loved your mother, but he did not trust her. He told me that she had married a man who saw money as something to be consumed, not protected. He said that if the trust went to her, it would be gone within 5 years. Spent on houses and cars and vacations and your brother's business ventures. He said you were different. He said you understood what it meant to build something that lasts. The next morning, I went to First National Trust with the brass key. The branch was downtown, an old building with marble floors and brass fixtures that looked like they had not changed since the 1970s. I gave the manager the key and my identification. She disappeared into the vault and came back 12 minutes later carrying a metal box that was surprisingly heavy for its size. She set it on the table in a private room and left me alone. Inside the safe deposit box were 6 items, each one sealed in its own labeled envelope. The original patent drawings, signed and dated by Harold Caldwell, November 1978. The internal memo from Meridian Manufacturing acknowledging Harold's contribution, dated March 1979. The patent filing, conspicuously missing Harold's name, dated August 1979. The sealed settlement agreement from 1991. The trust certificate, and a notarized letter from Samuel Rieger confirming everything. I laid them all out on the table in chronological order. 46 years of evidence. 46 years of patience. Each document pristine, protected, waiting. My grandfather had built this case the same way he built everything else. Carefully, precisely, without a single wasted step. I spent the next 2 weeks in Daniel's office, going through every document, verifying every figure, understanding every legal detail. The trust was structured impeccably. There were no loopholes, no ambiguities, no grounds for challenge. My grandfather had spent 30 years and a significant portion of the royalty income on legal fees to ensure that this trust was untouchable. He had anticipated every possible objection. He had even included a clause that specifically disinherited any family member who attempted to contest the trust, ensuring that a legal challenge would result in the challenger forfeiting any claim to Harold's other assets as well. The $47 million was mine. Legally, irrevocably, completely mine. But that was not the only thing I found in the safe deposit box. There was a second envelope, thinner than the first, containing a series of bank statements that told a different story. Starting in 2010, Grandpa Harold had been sending monthly transfers to an account in my name at a credit union I had never heard of. $500 a month every month for 14 years. The total was just over $84,000. But the account had never been accessed. The statements showed deposits and interest accumulation, nothing else. I had never known about this account. I had never received a single statement. The account's mailing address was my parents' house. Took me 3 days to confirm what I already suspected. I called the credit union and asked about the account. They confirmed it existed, confirmed the balance of $91,000 including interest, and confirmed that all correspondence had been sent to the address on file, my parents' home in Naperville. Someone in that house had been intercepting my mail for 14 years. Someone had known that my grandfather was sending me money and had made sure I never found out. I drove to my parents' house on a Saturday morning without calling ahead. The drive from the city to Naperville took 53 minutes. I spent every one of them gripping the steering wheel and rehearsing what I would say. I had the credit union statements in a manila folder on the passenger seat. $91,000. 14 years of monthly deposits, each one intercepted, each one redirected, each one stolen from me before I even knew it existed. My mother answered the door in her bathrobe. She looked surprised and then annoyed. "Nathan, we were not expecting you." I walked past her into the kitchen where my father was reading the newspaper. The kitchen smelled like burned toast and coffee. There were magnets on the refrigerator with photos of Drew's kids. None of me. I set the credit union statements on the table and said, 14 years, $500 a month. Where did it go? My father did not look up from his paper. My mother stared at the statements and then looked at my father and then looked at me. The silence lasted 11 seconds. I counted. The kitchen clock ticked. The refrigerator hummed. My father turned a page of his newspaper. "Those were for your education fund," my mother finally said. Her voice was careful, measured, the voice she used when she was constructing a story in real time. "Your father and I decided it was better to consolidate the family finances. We used it for household expenses." "My education fund," I repeated. "I paid for my own education, every dollar. $62,000 in loans that I paid off over 9 years while working 2 jobs. You used Grandpa's money for the household, for Drew's down payment, for Morgan's business, for your vacation to Scottsdale, for the new kitchen countertops, for everything except what it was intended for. Nathan, you are blowing this out of proportion. $84,000. 91 with interest. That is not out of proportion. That is theft." My mother's face went red. "Do not use that word in this house. What word would you prefer? Misappropriation? Embezzlement? I am a lawyer, Mom. I have a lot of words for what you did." My father finally looked up. His expression was not guilty. It was irritated. The same expression he wore when I interrupted dinner conversation or asked to go to a Bears game. The expression that said I was inconvenient. "Your grandfather was sending money he could not afford to send. We redirected it to where it was needed most. That is what parents do. They make decisions for the family." "For the family," I said. "Not for me. Never for me. You redirected it to Drew's down payment. You redirected it to Morgan's startup capital. You redirected it to your kitchen renovation and your annual vacation. I was working double shifts at a law library to pay my rent, and you were cashing checks with my name on them. Decisions for the family. Tell me, Dad, was I part of that family? Because from where I am sitting, it looks like I was just the one funding it." My father folded his newspaper with deliberate care and placed it on the table. He looked at me the way he always looked at me, like I was a problem to be managed, not a person to be understood. "You should be grateful," he said. "We raised you. We gave you a home. Everything we did was for this family. You gave Drew a bicycle and gave me colored pencils. You went to his basketball games and skipped my science fair. You funded Morgan's business and let me take out loans for law school. You ate Thanksgiving dinner on China while I sat on a folding chair with a paper plate. You intercepted money that my grandfather sent specifically for me because you decided I did not deserve it. Tell me again about this family. My mother was crying now, not quietly, the kind of crying that fills a room and demands attention and makes everyone else feel responsible. It had worked on me for 36 years. It did not work anymore. I left before either of them could respond. I did not yell. I did not slam the door. I walked out the way I always walked out, quietly, except this time I was not coming back. The next 3 months moved fast. Daniel Rieger and I worked with a team of attorneys to execute the trust transfer. The paperwork was extensive but clean. Grandpa Harold had done the hard work decades ago. All I had to do was sign, but the family found out. I still do not know exactly how. My guess is that Richard Stavros, Grandpa Harold's estate attorney, mentioned something to my mother during a routine probate call. Or perhaps my mother finally opened one of the trust-related letters that had been coming to my grandfather's house and that she had been forwarding to herself as executor. Whatever the source, my phone rang on a Wednesday evening in late July, and it was Drew. Nathan, what the hell is going on? Mom says there is some kind of trust fund from Grandpa. Why were we not told about this? I said nothing. Nathan, I am talking to you. How much money are we talking about? It is not your money, Drew. He was our grandfather too. Whatever he left should be divided equally. That is how families work. That is not how this works. The trust is in my name. It has been in my name for over 30 years. Grandpa Harold made that decision, not me. Drew's voice changed. The casual authority dropped away, and underneath it was something raw and desperate. How much? That is not your concern. Nathan, I swear to God, if you try to keep this from the family, I will get a lawyer and I will take you to court. You should read the trust document before you do that. There is a clause that says anyone who contests the trust forfeits their inheritance from the estate. That means the house, Drew. $1.8 million. You would lose it. You are bluffing. Call Daniel Rieger's office. The number is in the estate file. Ask him about Section 14, Paragraph B, the anti-contest provision. Then call me back when you have read it. This is not over, Nathan. It has been over for a long time, Drew. You just did not notice because you were too busy sitting in my chair. The line went dead. Morgan called the next day. Her approach was different. Where Drew used threats, Morgan used tears. She called me sobbing, saying she could not believe I would do this to the family, that Grandpa Harold would have wanted the money shared, that she was struggling financially and needed help. I listened to her cry for 5 minutes, and then I asked her a question I had been holding for years. Morgan, when was the last time you called me? Not to ask for something. Not because Mom told you to. Just to talk. Just to see how I was doing. She went quiet. I could hear her breathing, ragged and wet from crying. I do not remember, she finally said. Neither do I. That is the point. Over the following weeks, I received 17 calls from my mother, 11 from Drew, 4 from Morgan, and 3 from my father. I did not answer any of them. I also received 2 letters from an attorney representing my mother, claiming that the trust was the result of undue influence by a man suffering from age-related cognitive decline. Daniel Rieger responded with a 50-page filing that included Grandpa Harold's medical records showing full cognitive capacity until the week of his death, sworn affidavits from his physician and his neighbors, and a detailed timeline of the trust's creation dating back to 1991, when Harold was 64 years old and sharp as a razor. The legal challenge evaporated within a week. The anti-contest clause loomed over every move they made. If they pushed, they risked losing everything Grandpa Harold had already given them. But my mother tried a different approach. She showed up at my apartment building one evening, waiting in the lobby. She looked older than I remembered, smaller. She was wearing the necklace I had given her for Christmas, the one she had never thanked me for. Nathan, please, let me come up. Let me talk to you. I let her up. I made her coffee. She sat at my kitchen table and cried for 20 minutes before she said anything. Your grandfather was not well at the end. He made decisions that were not fair to the rest of us. You have to see that. Grandpa Harold was perfectly well. His doctor confirmed it. His lawyer confirmed it. He made this decision over 30 years ago, Mom. He just never told you. But why? Why would he leave everything to you and nothing to the rest of us? He did leave you things. He left you the life insurance, the furniture, the jewelry. He left Drew the house. He left Morgan the accounts. He left me a rusted toolbox. The difference is that I was the only one who looked inside it. That is not fair. Fair. You want to talk about fair. I set my coffee down and looked at her. When I graduated law school, you left early for Drew's wife's dinner party. When I won the biggest case of my career, Dad said, "That is nice," and went back to talking about Drew's strip mall. You let me sit on a folding chair at Christmas dinner like I was a guest in my own family's home. You took $91,000 that was meant for me and spent it without telling me. And you never, not once in 36 years, looked at me the way you look at Drew. So please, Mom, do not sit in my kitchen and tell me what is fair. You do not know what that word means. Not when it comes to me. She covered her mouth with her hand. Her shoulders shook. I watched her cry, and I felt something I did not expect. Not anger. Not satisfaction. Grief. Grief for the mother I wanted her to be and the one she actually was. Grief for all those years of trying to earn something that should have been given freely. Grief for a 7-year-old boy who got colored pencils while his brother rode a new bicycle. I want you to know that I loved you, Nathan. I always loved you. I know you did, Mom. You just loved me last. She left without finishing her coffee. I stood at the window and watched her walk to her car. She sat in the driver's seat for a long time before she started the engine. I wondered if she was thinking about all the moments she had missed, all the times she had chosen convenience over connection, all the chairs she had not sat at the table. Or maybe she was just trying to figure out how to tell my father that the money was not coming. I closed the curtain and washed both coffee cups and put them back in the cabinet. The months that followed were the loneliest and most liberating of my life. I did not speak to my family. I did not return calls. I did not attend the 4th of July barbecue or Drew's son's birthday party or any of the events where my attendance had always been expected and my presence had never been acknowledged. The silence was strange at first. For 36 years, my identity had been built around being the one who showed up. The dependable one. The one who answered the phone at 2 in the morning, who drove through snowstorms, who wrote checks without being asked twice. Without that role, I did not know who I was. I would catch myself reaching for my phone on Sunday evenings, the time I used to call my mother, and then I would set it back down and sit in the quiet of my apartment, listening to the city outside my window, trying to remember what I wanted before I started wanting their approval. I started seeing a therapist, a woman named Dr. Patterson who specialized in family estrangement. She told me something in our 3rd session that I think about every day. She said, "Nathan, you did not lose your family. You lost the idea of your family. The real family was never there. What was there was a system that needed you to function but never valued you as a person. Leaving that system is not abandonment. It is survival." I cried in her office that day, the first time I had cried in years. Not about the money or the toolbox or the mail they intercepted. About the colored pencils. About being 7 years old and watching Drew ride his bicycle through the window and thinking I had done something wrong. I worked with Daniel Rieger to restructure the trust, establishing a charitable foundation in Grandpa Harold's name that would fund scholarships for aspiring inventors and engineers from working-class backgrounds. I set aside a generous amount for my own future, enough to live comfortably for the rest of my life without practicing law, though I had no intention of stopping. I loved my work. I loved protecting ideas. Grandpa Harold had made sure I understood why. I also did something that surprised even me. I went back to the plant where Grandpa Harold had worked. Meridian Manufacturing had been absorbed by a larger corporation years ago, but the building still stood on the south side of Chicago. It was half empty now, converted partially into office space and storage. But in the basement, behind a locked door that a sympathetic maintenance worker let me through, I found it. Grandpa Harold's old workstation. The bench was still there, scarred with 40 years of use, the vise still bolted to the edge. Someone had scratched initials into the wood. H.C. Harold Caldwell. I stood there for a long time, my hand on that bench, imagining him at 26, 27 years old, full of ideas that nobody wanted to hear, building things in silence, trusting that someday the right person would find them. Walter, the retired engineer from the funeral, met me for lunch the following week at a diner on the south side, not far from the old plant. He was 83 years old, with thick white hair and hands that still showed the calluses of a lifetime of physical work. He ordered black coffee and a club sandwich and spoke about my grandfather for 2 hours straight. He told me the full story of what happened at the plant, the details that Grandpa Harold had been too modest or too hurt to include in his letter. How Harold had not just designed one valve. How he had improved dozens of processes over the years, each one quietly absorbed by management and credited to someone else. How the plant manager, Hargrove, had systematically exploited Harold's ideas for promotions and bonuses while keeping Harold at the same pay grade for over a decade. How the other machinists knew what was happening and were afraid to speak up because Hargrove controlled the shift assignments and could make your life miserable if you crossed him. Your grandfather never complained, Walter said, stirring his coffee slowly. Not once. Every single one of us would have been screaming, filing grievances, going to the union. Harold just went back to his bench and kept working, kept designing, kept improving things. I asked him once why he did not fight. He looked at me and said, "Walter, fighting them means becoming like them. I would rather build something they cannot steal." I did not understand what he meant at the time. I think I do now. Walter told me about the day the valve patent was filed. How Harold had come to work that morning expecting to see his name on the application. How Hargrove had called him into his office and explained that corporate had decided to file under the company name. How Harold had stood there, perfectly still, for what Walter described as the longest 30 seconds he had ever witnessed, and then nodded once and walked back to his bench without a word. That night, Walter said, he stayed late. I saw the light in his section when I was leaving. He was writing in that notebook of his, page after page. I think that was the night he started building the case. 45 years before you found it. He was not bitter, Walter said. That was the thing about Harold. He was never bitter. He was patient. He used to say, "The work speaks for itself. You just have to make sure someone is listening." I think he was waiting for you, Nathan. His whole life, he was waiting for you. I received one more piece of mail from my family. A letter from my father, handwritten, which was unusual because my father had not handwritten anything in years. It was short. It said, "Nathan, your mother and I have discussed this. We believe your grandfather's assets should be shared equally among his grandchildren. If you choose not to do this voluntarily, we will be forced to pursue legal options. This is not a threat. It is a statement of principle. Family takes care of family." I wrote back. My letter was also short. "You are right. Family takes care of family. Grandpa Harold took care of me. I am sorry you never noticed. The trust is not subject to negotiation, challenge, or redistribution. Any legal action will trigger the anti-contest clause and result in the forfeiture of all estate assets currently in your possession, including the Lakeview house, the investment accounts, and the insurance payout. I have enclosed a copy of the relevant clause for your reference. I wish you well, Nathan." I never heard from them again. Not directly, anyway. Through mutual acquaintances, I learned that Drew sold the Lakeview house and used the proceeds to cover debts from a development deal that went bad. Morgan's design firm closed 6 months later when the investment accounts ran dry. My parents downsized to a condominium in the suburbs. They are comfortable but not wealthy. They have what they have, and what they have is exactly what Grandpa Harold intended them to have. I am 37 now. I still practice patent law. I still live in Chicago. I drive past my grandfather's old plant sometimes on my way to the office, and I think about a man who spent 43 years building things in silence, who was cheated out of his life's work, who watched his family dismiss him as simple, and who spent the last 30 years of his life carefully, methodically, patiently assembling the most elegant piece of engineering I have ever seen. Not a valve. Not a machine. Plan. A plan to protect the one person in his family who understood what it means to build something with your hands and your mind and your heart, even when nobody is watching. The toolbox sits on my desk now. Not in the garage, not in a closet. On my desk, in my office, where I can see it every day. I cleaned it up, treated the rust, replaced the electrical tape on the handle. But I left the false bottom exactly as it was, the little latch still hidden in the corner, the compartment still there. People ask me about it sometimes. Clients, colleagues, the cleaning staff. They see this old, worn toolbox on an expensive desk in a corner office and they want to know why it is there. I tell them the truth. I tell them it was a gift from my grandfather. I tell them it is the most valuable thing I own. They look at it and nod politely, assuming it is sentimental value, like an old watch or a faded photograph. They have no idea. Grandpa Harold used to say that the best inventions are the ones that solve problems people did not know they had. He solved mine. He solved the problem of being invisible. He solved the problem of being the one who gives everything and receives nothing. He solved the problem of a family that could not see what was right in front of them. He did it with a false bottom, a brass key, and 40 years of patience. And he did it with love. The quiet, stubborn, unbreakable kind. The kind that builds things in basements and hides them in toolboxes and waits decades for the right person to find them. The kind that does not announce itself or demand recognition or keep score. The kind that simply works, day after day, year after year, until the moment it is needed most. I am that person. I was always that person. I just did not know it until I dropped a toolbox on a Tuesday night and heard something shift. Some things have to break before you can see what is inside them. Toolboxes, families, and sometimes yourself. Thank you for walking this journey with me. Before you go, I have left 2 more stories here on your screen. Both from men who discovered that family is not always who you are born to. It is who stands by you when the truth comes out. Click on whichever one calls to you. And if you want to join our community of people who understand what it is like to be the outsider looking in, that notification bell is your invitation. Until tomorrow, remember, your story matters, even if they tried to erase it.